The Missouri Tigers take down number 1 Kansas in basketball. How's that for a tease? Let's go with it on this special live edition of Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your very happy Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball with a special live edition of Locked On Mizzou here for you on YouTube. If you're listening later, well, you know what? If you want to check me live on YouTube, you got to subscribe over on YouTube. Click your notifications bell for the next time I do go live. But you know what? I got to go live because Missouri's bowl game was revealed today. The Tigers are going to play Iowa in the Music City Bowl. Plenty to talk about there. But you know what? Before I start the program, I do want to remind you, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, on today's program, I'm going to get started with Missouri beating Kansas in basketball. How about that? I know I usually lead with football on this program because, well, quite honestly, that's what puts money in the old pocket. But I'm going to let you all in on a little secret. If it were up to me, I would lead with basketball every bit as much as football because that's the kind of fan I am. In fact, I was a high school basketball player. I went to a small school called Southern Boone here in Boone County. We didn't even have varsity football when I went to high school. So I've just been a gigantic basketball fan forever. And the point here is that as somebody who has followed this program since the days of the Hearn Center, well, this is the first win over an AP number 1 for Missouri since I saw Missouri take down Kansas in the Hearn Center all the way back in 1997. Of course, the famous Corey Tate game. And this is just such a shot in the arm for the program and for Dennis Gates. I mean, it really can't be overstated, honestly. I mean, this is the first win over Kansas in a dozen years. I went my entire 30s without seeing a win over Kansas. And the beautiful thing about this to me is the Tigers won with defense. And that's something that has been severely lacking, I would say, in the first 2 years under Dennis Gates at Missouri. This has to be the best defensive team in the Gates era with the Tigers by a country mile at this point. Now, here's the thing. Here's the good and the bad if you're a Missouri basketball player right now. The good news is, well, you're going to have a fun time tonight on campus. I can promise you that. It's going to be unlike anything you've ever experienced before as a Missouri athlete and student. I can promise you that. But the downside is, well, this is actually a good thing too, but I'm kind of trying to make a point here. Now Missouri has no excuses. They have to play defense like this all of the time. And when Missouri forced 15 turnovers in the first half, my goodness, the amount of effort and passion that you saw. I got to give a lot of credit to Tamar Bates as well, the senior who took the lead, a guy who's from just over the state line in Kansas, by the way, a guy who understands this rivalry and said so aloud. So I think that he is a leader of this team, and a bunch of other guys, of course, as leaders of this team as well. But in particular, Bates, in my opinion, deserves a tremendous amount of credit. Speaking of seniors who deserve a tremendous amount of credit, man, Josh Gray was truly the horse tonight, wasn't he? My goodness. Had basically all of Missouri's rebounds, it seemed, for the first 10 minutes of the game or so. And again, Missouri, they won this game with defense. Ant-Man, Anthony Robinson, was truly great, I thought, defensively at the point of attack. Perkins, too. Shaw was a menace, especially getting his long arms just out in the passing lanes for Kansas. Every time Kansas would try to swing the ball and maybe take advantage of Missouri's aggressive defense trying to get into the passing lanes, well, guess what? So often Aiden Shaw was darting and covering so much ground in this game. I think he deserves a tremendous amount of credit here too, especially, again, disrupting their swing passes around the perimeter. And when it comes to adjustments in the second half, where obviously Missouri, allowed Kansas to come back, where the Tigers led by as many as 24 points in the second half. I specifically remember it being 51-30 at one point. And then for about the next, it seemed, 15 minutes or so, Missouri scored about 11 points. And the offense was just completely stuck in the mud. And while I was waiting, as I'm sure many of you were who attended that game, sort of stuck in a bit of gridlock traffic there, trying to exit Mizzou Arena. Well, here's the deal. One adjustment, as I was listening to the radio, Coach Dickie Nutt said, was that Dennis Gates said, really one of the few adjustments was Gates said, hey, let's not forget to get back to the transition game. We can't just rely on our half-court offense because, quite honestly, at a certain point, I think Kansas realized, maybe a little too late, to be honest with you, but I think Kansas eventually realized that among the guys Missouri was playing, that actually Tamar Bates was really the only shooting threat for Missouri. So once the Tigers were in the half court, I think Kansas started packing the paint and making things really tough on Missouri, to the point where you're basically relying on a bunch of drives and free throw attempts for the most part. But speaking of adjustments, the one adjustment that Dickie Nutt said that Missouri didn't make that he really loved, and I absolutely loved it too, is that Missouri never went to a zone defense. Coach Nutt thought that, so often there's times that when the defense struggled, that Gates might change his mind and just to change things up, go to a zone defense. But here's my feelings on that. Number one, I'm just a big man-to-man defense guy. To me, the adjustments are within the man defense concept. That's what you need to do, because to me, a zone defense, it's not like football. Don't take me wrong here, but in basketball, I'm a real big believer that for the most part, playing zone defense, especially if you're not Syracuse, if you're not John Chaney with Temple, and that's not your usual thing, zone defense is almost an admission of defeat. You're just going, well, I guess we suck at defense. Let's try zone now. For me, I would much rather make adjustments in terms of, hey, let's go under the screen on this guy instead of over, or let's switch, or let's hedge harder, or let's not hedge at all. Let's play a drop coverage and pick and roll. To me, those types of adjustments are much better. But regardless, I'm going to give Dennis Gates a ton of credit here, because there's so much talk, including this podcast from me, about how Dennis Gates needs to eventually cut down his rotations. Well, guess what? He did against Kansas. The bingo hopper rotations that I sort of sarcastically called them in the first few games. Well, it turns out there was a method to Coach Gates' madness, because against Cal, he played 12 guys in the first half, pretty much 7 or 8 in the second half. And that's basically the amount, the main rotation there, probably 7 or 8 guys, if I had to guess without even looking at the box score here. So to me, Gates really stuck to his guns, stuck to his game plan of what I saw anyway. Hey, let's play hard man-to-man defense. Let's make DeJuan Harris score. Let's make KJ Adams shoot. Those were suggestions that I made, and let's attack DeJuan Harris offensively, and let's just attack in general. While Missouri was really effective offensively in the first half, it wasn't because of a lot of great ball movement. They were basically getting a matchup that they wanted and then driving, whether it was Mitchell against Hunter Dickinson, whether it was Ant Robinson driving the ball, or it was Tamar Bates driving the ball. Just time and time again, Missouri stuck to its guns. And even in the second half, when Missouri was struggling offensively, I thought they really needed to stick to that plan, and they did, in my opinion. That's what I saw. Anyway, I'm going to be interested to hear what all of you saw. We're going live here on YouTube. I'm going to take some of your comments here as we go along here in the program, and also got plenty more to talk about this game, and of course the Missouri Bowl game as well coming up here in just a little bit. But you know what? I want to talk about Omaha Steaks too, because nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience. And the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully crafted and curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, folks, just needed to take a quick little sip of water there as I'm going live here. And as I go live, I quickly realize, man, voiceover work is a lot more effort than you realize when you aren't relying on the pause button as I normally do. But, you know, let's talk more about this Missouri basketball game. Hey, I know Missouri is playing Iowa in the Music City Bowl. Not a huge amount of analysis at the moment. I'm going to talk about it here in just a little bit. But I'm sorry, when Kansas goes down, the number 1 Kansas Jayhawks loses to Missouri. Forgive me if I focus on that just a little bit more. And I got to say, one thing I loved from the game is the full embrace of Mr. Brightside. We don't necessarily need to embrace that in every single game, I would argue. But against Kansas, yes, the old chef's kiss for sure, especially the timing of when the FKU chant started. Somehow, whoever was in charge there, I don't know if it was the DJ, I don't know who it was, but somebody did an amazing job of timing that chant with the moment KU entered the ball game. And KJ Adams said after the game, the Kansas wing said that, you know what, we just played bad. The crowd had nothing to do with it. Maybe he's right. I can't prove that, but I'll say this, it definitely didn't hurt. The crowd was absolutely amazing today. And you know what? While I'm thinking of it, one of my everydayers, one of my most loyal listeners here, Anthony Robinson II fan account, incredible handle, by the way, on X, has a question for me. He said, how did this atmosphere compare to past games when we've played against Kansas? Well, honestly, I would say that this was, number one, just atmospheres at Mizzou Arena in general. This is the best one since I think we played Kansas in 2012. The famous Marcus Denman last 90 seconds or so for the Tigers. To me, that's as loud as I've ever heard it in Mizzou Arena. I don't think it's going to get any louder than that. This one was pretty darn loud, though. It's as loud as I've heard it since then. I think the loudest I've heard it since then for sure. So, yeah, just obviously an incredible atmosphere here for the Tigers. I'll say another little thing I loved for this game. I loved that my guy Peyton Marshall got to lead the Tigers out of the tunnel before the final time, just before tip off there with a huge smile on his face too. So I just loved, again, my adopted son, Peyton Marshall here, just with a huge smile on his face, fully embracing not only as Missouri did with Mr. Brightside, but Peyton obviously fully embracing the crowd, the rivalry, the whole thing. It's just fun to see these guys slowly but surely turn into true sons, and indeed, one of us. So it just felt like a whole bunch of these guys became one of us today, including the neck-braced Caleb Grill, who was obviously very much into the game. It was fun to hear that his parents attended the game despite Caleb being out of there. And one thing I noticed too, of course, was that maybe Dennis Gates took my advice. We may be best friends now. I see Dennis at lunch on occasion. I'm just kidding, people. But for real, I did make a suggestion that I thought the Tigers should change up the starting lineup a little bit. The Missouri had gotten off to slow starts offensively in recent games, and I don't want to blame Honor Boateng for that whatsoever. I think he's a true freshman and a really talented one at that is eventually going to find his way and be a really good player for the Tigers. But it felt like the last couple games, while he's capable offensively, it looked like he wasn't really trying to shoot the ball. I felt like Missouri needed a bit of a jump start there. Well, my suggestion was that Missouri should start Marquez Warwick, but it ended up being Tony Perkins. And while that didn't necessarily, I don't know that necessarily was the exact correlation there for a fast start for Missouri, I will say Perkins, just his size defensively in particular, I thought made a big difference in this ball game. This is something I focused on quite a bit in the offseason, is that Missouri, just at the point of attack last year, as much as I love Sean East, as much as I love Nick Honor, those guys defensively, well, this is a different group with Anthony Robinson, with Tony Perkins, hey, especially with Aiden Shaw out there able to cover as much ground as he is. This is just a different looking group defensively. And while Missouri, as I pointed out before, down the stretch, I think Kansas realized, hey, we've only got one real perimeter shooter that we've got to worry about. Let's just stick to Tamar Bates and force everybody else to shoot a jump shot. That was an effective strategy for Kansas. But at the same time, I just think that ultimately Missouri was able to win the day by sticking to their original strategy, by driving. And while it wasn't as effective, I just think the trade-offs in terms of, hey, let's take Josh Gray out of the game for a lot of times. Well, who's going to then guard Hunter Dickinson? I just don't think you can count on Mark Mitchell to do that, for example. I just think that I really love that Dennis Gates stuck to his guns and his strategy in this game, because even though it wasn't always pretty in the second half, I just feel like the trade-offs would have been worse. If you just put in extra shooting, then suddenly I think Kansas would have suddenly gotten out of its funk offensively and gotten a lot more of what it wanted offensively, which it did in the second half anyway. I really think that if Dennis Gates would have panicked and changed his strategy, I think Missouri loses this ball game. So good on Dennis Gates. Good on, to me, that entire coaching staff for doing exactly that. And coming up, let's talk and focus on the gridiron for just a little bit as Missouri is playing Iowa in the Music City Bowl. I think there's an up and down to this matchup, so I want to talk about that here in just a bit. But first, FanDuel, of course, is my favorite place to place all my excellent wagers. And as I pointed out, if you're skipping these reads, congrats on saving time, but you're really costing yourself money. I had Oregon -3.5 over Penn State. What can I say except you're welcome? But you know what? If you're a new customer, you can bet $5 at FanDuel and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And Big Timer 24 on YouTube says no highlights. Excuse me, bud. Did you expect me to hold up my iPhone the entire time and record the basketball game and then what? Do that as I'm playing this on live on you? Okay, anyway. So that was a little bit of a ridiculous comment, but how about some better ones? Get a job, Dixon. Great comment, Junior 145. JB and Everydayer says, I called it, M-I-Z effing O-U. Great comment there. Hey, Missouri playing Iowa in the Music City Bowl. JB thinks a 2-touchdown win, a healthy, well-rested Cook, Marquise, Noel, maybe Mookie back. That's a good point. You know, Missouri a little banged up at the end of the season. Obviously, the Tigers not getting Connor Tollison back. But ultimately, here's kind of my thoughts on the Music City Bowl. Number one, I'm happy the Tigers are in the Music City Bowl. I think Nashville is a great spot. It's a fun place to be. Obviously, not the warmest place to be, but hey, a fun place to be around the holiday season. As far as I'm concerned, drivable. Hey, locked on. David, Give me two tanks of gas. That'll get me there and back. Come on. It's like $160 in my truck. What are we talking about here? Help me out here. But you know what? I can barely speak. I'm so happy about this Missouri victory over Kansas still. But on that Music City Bowl, as much as I love the location, I have to admit I'm a tiny bit disappointed in the opponent. Nothing against the Iowa Hawkeyes, but they're not exactly an offensive juggernaut. Maybe we're not looking at the most exciting bowl game in the history of college football there, but certainly a regional rivalry, and one, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in 2020 was Missouri not going to play Iowa in the Music City Bowl. I know they were going to play Iowa. I'm going to have to check on this, but I'm pretty sure Missouri was going to play Iowa in Nashville in 2020 during the COVID season before the Tigers said, meh, we're good. So that is interesting that there's a bit of a run it back here when the Tigers didn't act that interested in it originally. I think of all the Big Ten teams that Missouri could have played here, well, I think Iowa's clearly probably third in the pecking order, to be honest with you. I would have liked to have played Michigan as the defending national champions, a big-time program that Missouri hasn't played in nearly 50 years. That would have been more interesting to me than an Iowa team that Missouri did play in 2010, I believe, down in Tempe against Iowa in the what corporate sponsored bowl? I can't, the Inside Bowl? That's it, right? I think I have that right. But regardless, I would have rather played Michigan for the Block M, by the way. Put that thing on the line. The winner gets the Block M. That should have been the stakes there if we played Michigan. But I would have also rather played Nebraska as well. Obviously a traditional rival that Missouri hasn't played in over a decade. I think that could have gotten the juices flowing as well. But you know what? Iowa, a decent matchup, just not probably the one that I or Brett, don't call me Laird, don't call me Brett Veach, probably would have liked either. So I'll certainly admit to that. Let's see what other highlights and questions do we have today. Todd Alexander asks, did you golf today? Todd, I wish, buddy, but unfortunately Missouri had to start the game right during the middle, during the perfect time to play golf. Profanity on national TV is perfection, asked TDL. I would say so. Even I got in on the profanity. I have to admit, I'm usually not a big curse during the middle of the guy as the C-list local celebrity that I am. But for Kansas, you know what? I'm going to make an exception. And I have to admit, I love that Missouri leaned in to the Mr. Brightside chance once again. So, you know what? To all of you reading this out there and joining me live here, there's about almost 100 of you joining me live here, and surely thousands more after this. So thanks as always for being a listener of Locked On Mizzou. We certainly do it for days like this, don't we? A win over Kansas. They certainly don't happen every day. I cannot wait for the Missouri Bowl game, and I can't wait for the rest of this Missouri football season. Join me the rest of the week, your team every day, right here on Locked on Mizzou.